Hey everyone, I'm Shrenik. I'm the founder and CEO of Marigold Health, and I'm really excited to be bringing this panel to you all. So the theme of this panel is really about that moment where you go from being, an individual founder that's just selling, trying to get people to buy into this vision, to actually being someone at the head of an organization, someone who's actually working day in and day out to make this vision a reality. And one of the reasons I was so excited when Hani reached out to me about having this panel was my experience was basically I started Marigold to try and make mental health care more accessible to vulnerable populations, which was a mission that really enamored me. The challenge was I had left school to start this company, so it was a very early career. And after I raised my first round of venture capital, I really found myself in an entirely different day-to-day workflow in terms of hiring folks, managing larger financials, delegating, and frankly, it's not really something I could have learned in a class, even if I had stayed in school. Where I did get a lot of this learning was through conversations with other founders who had been through it already, who had that experience. And oftentimes these conversations were very informal, much more based around discussion. And the other thing that I found oftentimes was that it didn't really necessarily relate to my actual industry. So I would get great insight and great input from founders kind of across different sectors, different stages, even different international markets, which is why I'm really excited to be bringing you what's, I think, an extremely qualified panel with a really broad range of experience. So without further ado, I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Since this is a Zoom, I'll say, Anthony, why don't you introduce yourself first, and then Ashifi and Shireen, and we can get things started.
Great, thank you, Shrenik. My name is Anthony Tayoun. I'm the co-founder and COO of Dexai Robotics. At Dexai, we're making the lives of kitchen staff and food service professionals better by automating their activities or some of their activities through robotics. So we want to put a robot in every restaurant, and by doing that, improve the overall experience for both the food service professionals and the consumers, automating tasks from slicing, dicing, to assembly, to using a grill or a fryer. Incredibly happy to be here and excited to tell you all about the challenges we've had and the opportunities that arose, especially in a world with COVID and a bunch of other things on our minds on an everyday basis.
Great, I could go next. My name is Ashifi Gogo. I am the founder CEO of Sproxel. We bring trust and transparency to supply chains around the world for a more equitable society. What I mean by that is we have solutions that we offer to companies that make products so that consumers who buy those products can check to make sure they're not counterfeit, they're not stolen, they're not diverted, and not support illicit trade around the world. We're 10 years old, so I don't know if we could still call ourselves a startup, but we're profitable. We have dozens and dozens of clients and hundreds of brands on our platform, and significant international operations in India and Africa. So if you're thinking about how to impact the world sitting here in Boston, but having lots of reach around the world, I'm happy to help you with that as well.
Hi, I'm Shireen Shermack. I'm an entrepreneur in residence at Harvard Business School and an advisor there. And about a year ago, I decided to take the plunge again and start a new company. So I'm also the founder and CEO of a company called Nth Party, which is a data privacy startup focused on creating a truce between personalization and privacy.
Great, thank you all. So attendees, you might notice that there is a poll going around. It's just going to ask you a bit about your venture that you're currently working on. Do me a favor and give that poll a quick answer. It'll allow us to make sure that the things we discuss are most relevant to your experience. Now back to our panel. One topic that I really want to start off with is one of the most immediate things, right, that happens as you start scaling an organization is you start bringing on additional people, right? You're not just some rando in a garage, you suddenly have a team, and these people are basically ambassadors for your mission. So I want all of the panelists to address this individually, but how do you look at diversity? How do you define that when you're growing your team? And do you see that diversity as related to the core vision of your company itself, or do you see it as something separate? So we can go in the same order. So Anthony, Ashifi, and Shireen, it'd be great to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, sure. So I think diversity is a pretty big topic, and it has there's a wide range, and it depends how you look at it and how you define it. I think for us, we start with really the top of the funnel. Shrenik, as you were mentioning, you're growing the team, you're hiring more people, you're adding more people to the team, and so we start right there during the hiring process. And I think the biggest, most important thing there is to eliminate or try to eliminate as many biases as possible. So we make sure we do things such as standardizing interview questions, removing the names of people who are interviewing or who are submitting their resumes, so that we make the most objective, we have the most objective process and screening process there. And that helps starting with that, non-biased or reduced bias as much as possible to enable diversity. I think diversity on the team also mirrors a little bit of the philosophy that a team is having, right? So for us, for instance, we really care about pursuing the truth and getting a very rational and logical answer out of things. And that means that to do that effectively, you have to have a more transparent and a more candid sort of team environment. And to make a more diverse culture or more diverse company work, you also necessitate all these things as well. And so I think it goes hand in hand with sort of the culture that you're trying to make as a company. And so now maybe talking a little bit about the outcomes of that, diversity not only helps you grow a team that's able to also work effectively together, but I think it also gives you quite a few different angles on how to approach certain problems. One example that comes to mind is, we're putting robots in kitchens, and that makes food goes bad faster because of the heat component. And a lot of such things will not be possible to uncover unless you have a diverse team that's able to work effectively together in a safe space, in a safe environment, without having to worry about many of these demographic biases that we have in the back of our minds on a daily basis. So I think there's a bunch of ways to do that and to nurture that diversity on your team. It starts really from the first moment you meet that individual, or perhaps even before you meet them, and it continues throughout your day-to-day.
Yeah, I could add to that really quickly. One of the things that we faced was rather interesting because we're looking at multi-country situations. So within the first 3 years of the company, we're already in 6 countries around the world on 3 continents. And so some of the diversity conversation basically came to us, right? We go into India, we're already dealing with a different culture. We go into Nigeria, where we have an office, we're dealing with a different culture. So we learned very quickly to value these opinions. But you still have to work hard to have gender equality, because that issue is almost universal, where you go into looking at the workforce and you don't find as many female applicants as male applicants coming in. And so that's one of the things that we actively are doing better now. There's a question around policy later that I'll give you a story where we had an epic fail that we had to learn from. But there's a lot of growing to do, even within the startup world, on how to identify the various biases around the world and what is our role to contribute towards that. So I'll say that it's better to go in and take a few steps, even if you make a mistake and recover, than it is to sort of shy away from the issue because it's so complex and so thorny that one is afraid to make a mistake. Go in, learn, and advance your understanding so that you can help improve the situation, knowing what the various bias concerns are in the various countries you may be working in.
I guess what I would add to that is a couple of things. One is it's generally worth reminding management teams in general that early stage companies that have diverse founding teams have a higher return on investment and are less likely to fail. And so if anybody needs a financial motivation for doing so, you know, the numbers actually support diversity. But in terms of actually building a diverse team, I found that one of the most important things you can do is to let people know that they are welcome. And there are a lot of different ways to doing that, making sure that your website's representative of more of your aspirations of who you'd like to be. When folks are interviewing, especially when things were in person, they tend to notice if they're the only person of their race, ethnicity, or gender, you know, who are walking around that day. They tend to notice who the managers are, and it makes it more difficult to attract diversity. So I think somebody else mentioned like the applicant pools, and the thing that I have tried to remind people of is that the applicant pool is reflective of the image that you're putting out there. There's generally enough qualified applicants of every race, ethnicity, and gender. But if you aren't letting people know that they're welcome and sort of communicating and reaching out to those communities early in the process, you're not going to get the applicants you want, which is why, you know, you see things like incubators that are heavily concentrated male will go out and do this second sweep to try and find women or minorities to fill seats. And, you know, I know from a lot of folks who generally get that second phone call that they kind of wish that the group or the company had reached out or thought about that before having to do that second sweep.
Yeah, I think those are both or all really important points. I mean, especially acknowledging, right, that like as an industry, this is definitely an area where startups and especially venture-backed startups could stand to do a lot better. And Shireen, I think your point is really important because when it comes to moving past just diversity, right, and going towards inclusion, bringing on a more diverse team early on allows those folks, right, to shape your culture, as opposed to, you know, these folks will know if you're a team of all white men and, you know, they're interviewing as the only Black person or the only woman or whatever, right? Like people are not stupid. People join startups because it's because they're looking for an organization, right, they can really commit to and really contribute to the culture of. And, you know, on that note, and I'll just throw this out there for anyone to answer, how do you guys actually track if you're succeeding with your diversity metrics or not, right? Because we talk about this as industry leaders in a very abstract sense, but on a day-to-day sense, how do you understand if your organization is where you want it to be at a given time?
I mean, the best way to do that is to be as quantitative as you possibly can at each level in the organization. So for early companies, there are generally not a lot of layers. It's usually the management team, maybe the middle management team, and then you know, a lot of people who are learning the craft, I guess. And just making sure that the management team is, you know, if it doesn't hit a metric of 1/3 diversity, that tends to be the tipping point at which women or minorities don't feel like they're always talking as the woman or as the person of color. So 1/3 is usually a pretty good quantitative metric to shoot for. And I think that's a decent way as any.
Yeah, one other tactic you might consider is looking at people's sense of freedom of expression and how easily can they disagree and feel like they can express different opinions without repercussions. And so having that open culture helps that everyone can participate in, and obviously screening to make sure that it's not a homogeneous group, gives you a sense that people are feeling more and more comfortable to express themselves and feel included, that their opinions do matter and will be taken seriously. So that's another ongoing sense of feedback, qualitative feedback that you can get based on the town halls or team meetings that you may be having. Again, adjusting for people's personalities. Not everyone is outspoken, but if people repeatedly do not speak and they're not asked why, it further diminishes their sense of worth within the team, and that is something team members, early team members and managers, founders should catch it early.
Definitely. And in fact, it makes me think of something we had noticed also, which is to pay attention to which employees are most comfortable making referrals for open positions. So I think there's a lot of different things you can do, but definitely not stopping right at just that diversity and making sure to take that next step to make sure these people are actually contributing to your culture on a day-to-day basis, and they feel like they have a stake in the organization as a whole. Now, I guess actually this brings up sort of our next topic, which is just, I'll throw out sort of generally, how do you go about managing a team for the first time, right? How do you go about empowering, let's say, your middle managers to take some tasks off your plate, or even generally, what are some best practices y'all put in place as it relates to you sort of managing that larger team for a first time?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. I mean, there's the usual things of making sure you're having one-on-ones with people who report to you and having a larger team meeting, once a week, so that everybody has an understanding of what the other disciplines are up to. But I've generally considered it my job, whether I'm CEO or managing a team, to just figure out what the people who are working around me actually need and making that happen. So if we need capital, that's the thing I'm focused on. If people are complaining because we haven't got branding guidelines, I go find somebody to go do that. But you really should have your time driven by what the people who work for you need in terms of support.
Yeah, I want to echo what Shireen mentioned. And I think on top of that, what I try to do is to make sure that most of the conversation is reduced to what people need to really excel and work better. And so part of that means enabling others and middle management or really anyone else on the team to be able to make decisions on their own without requiring the higher management or the rest of the leadership to be involved in those decisions. And it's really those difficult, very thorny decisions perhaps that go up to management. But on a daily basis, you want everyone on the team enabled and empowered to make decisions on the fly exactly the same way you would do them. And getting to that requires a whole lot of explicit work on team building to get to that stage, right? So if you're a product-driven company, a lot of that means reducing many of the decisions early on to really the product conversation and customer centricity and how you would think if you were the customer and what you would want. And then maybe laying out those trade-offs internally and taking a decision from there. And so again, echoing what Shireen said, but I think to get there, you first want to enable as many people in the company as possible to be able to make many of those decisions on their own.
No, Anthony, I think that's really good of you to bring up, because as it relates to getting people to be more empowered, I think it's really easy for founders to forget that for this being a company, right, that you've poured tons of hours and tons of time into, end to end, for a normal person who's just joining an organization, it's extremely intimidating to simply be told, oh, we respect, argument here, like you should speak up if you disagree with the founder or the CEO. And I was wondering, could you give us some more, I guess, specific examples on what was some of that groundwork that you did to get people to that stage? And I see you're smiling, so I think you have a response here.
No, I mean, you're exactly spot on, right? It's not easy to get to that stage of comfort. And I think it genuinely requires a lot of candor on the team. A lot of transparency, a lot of times you as a founder taking on or being what I like to call emotionally flexible, and a lot of times being accepting of other opinions in a very public way, right? And sometimes that means drilling things down or distilling them to first principles and then losing an argument or winning an argument from that fashion. I think what helped with us is we're two co-founders, and a lot of times we have different opinions between ourselves. And so that also shows that how we resolve these differences in opinions gets reflected on the team as well, right? And so if we get too emotional and resolve them, because I put in more hours and I poured my soul into it, then this obviously doesn't help giving really putting that mentality out there on the team. I think another angle is getting the team as close to customer as possible. So for us, what we did is we had everyone on the engineering team rotate into spending a few days on our customer side, even though it's not really part of their job description or part of their daily activities. But that helped everyone really understand the customer problem and speak their language, which brought everyone closer together in terms of how we break down problems and get to their solutions. So I think part of it is on the process side, part of it is on the context side, and the biggest part of it is living and breathing it and practicing what you preach on a daily basis.
Really want to pull on that thread you started with, the being vocal and public about supporting decisions that aren't your own. You know, we had an exercise a couple of weeks ago. We included the interns in it from all the disciplines. It was really a branding exercise, but our engineering intern came and he made one of the strongest contributions in the whole exercise. And the tagline that I told you about our company at the beginning is so easy for me to say now because of the work that we did there. And I think it's just really important when you highlight successes that are not your own. And if it's an intern who contributed something that's really meaningful, say it in a team meeting. And, you know, when they roll off at the end of the summer, make sure you read back their accomplishments to everyone so that they understand that they were appreciated, and so that, you know, teaming directly with them can really understand that they had they had meaningful work, and we entrusted them with things. And if they could see that the interns are entrusted, they can generally see that, you know, higher up you go in the organization, it's only should be easier.
Yeah, one quick addition to that is when we started the company 10 years ago, there were about 4 to 5 of us in Boston, and we're always heads down, just getting the job done, and we didn't take enough time to appreciate each other's contributions. And I didn't know at the time the value of just a thank you, I see you, you're doing a great job. And it costs nothing to say, right? It's not gonna drain your balance sheet or P&L, but it just does so much to boost people's confidence. And even when people say that they don't need thanks to be motivated, still do it, because it always feels good. You know, and so even with my senior leadership team, I go around and now I've learned, you know, over several scars and battles, I've learned to do the right thing. I say thank you profusely to anyone in the company that's even just doing their job, right? Because it's our assumption that they should do their job to get compensated, but you know, to be honest, the quality of which they do their job is influenced by the environment, and so the appreciation that they get and the respect that they are able to earn for the work that you're doing, and recognition that comes with that. So take a moment to appreciate what people are doing, even if you think that is what they're supposed to be doing in the first place, because it always feels good and it always motivates people to do better and to keep giving their best.
Yeah, it's probably worth reiterating that old maxim of always praise in public and criticize in private. I mean, many years of going through, you know, that sort of thing. And if you will always pay. So it's not just, I agree with you very much, like thanking people even when, you know, it's just a Thursday and you know they're cranking. And, but doing that in front of somebody else is that much more, you know, powerful. And if you have something negative to say to somebody, you should definitely do it in private. It's a hard-won lesson.
Definitely all good points. And, you know, we're talking a lot about sort of how important it is to be intentional, right, in your own behavior as a founder, right, to really kind of model these principles for your employees. And I think that's a really key topic. But sort of as you grow, right, a larger and larger portion actually becomes middle management, right, in terms of you have team leaders who are directly managing, right, a lot of the work that's actually being done. So I would love to hear the panel kind of speak to how is your approach in terms of, you know, for one, like building a rapport with middle management, say separate from how you might work with, you know, a direct report that's just an individual contributor. And then I have a couple other questions on this topic because I think it's quite rich in that it's not exactly a solved problem.
Yeah, I mean, middle management is in some ways the toughest role in the company because you can't really see what kind of pressures are happening from the board or other things outside externally. But what you can do in managing somebody who's in between is, to let them know what those things are and what you're holding them accountable for. And just the self-check is always to make sure that whatever you're holding somebody accountable for, they have the tools to do. I really feel like, one key learning over time for me has just been make sure that authority and accountability are a direct match. And if they don't have what they need within their control, they're never going to succeed. And I think the other thing to do for a new manager is to sit down with them after their team meetings and say, how is X doing? How is Y doing? Do you feel like they're all performing? What can I do to help? Is there anything that, you want to hear from me in terms of what I've seen? And offer to give that feedback, but don't push because they need to feel like they have the ability to manage the people they're managing. So you don't want to kind of come between.
Yeah, I guess to quickly add to that, I think also with middle management, what often gets forgotten is opportunities to grow and be mentored, right? And so a lot of times at startups, you would have this this lost perception about growth opportunities. And so what you have to do a lot of times for middle management in particular is to continue showing that there's more room to grow. Even if the leadership team or the senior leadership team is composed of founders, that doesn't really mean much for the growth trajectory of certain individuals. The fact that startups, operate at lightning speed, which means that all of those promotion decisions, whether it's title or financial or compensation or what have you, can also happen at a faster pace. And as a leader, I think a lot of times it means recognizing that you might not have the right set of skills to mentor and coach these middle management individuals. And these middle managers sometimes require you to have external contractors or mentors or advisors that would help them grow in turn, which grows your overall team. And so I think, besides the day-to-day operational monitoring, you also want to make sure that people still have room to grow. Middle management is a very delicate one, and it's a big topic, Shrenik. So I'm not sure if we want to dive deeper now or how you want to approach it.
Yeah, no, those are great points. I think one of the reasons why I said it was a sort of unsolved problem was also that there's sort of all sorts of ways, right, you can go about building out the middle management team, right, all the way from everyone knows, I think, a couple founders who are like, I don't believe in middle management, right, they got like 20 direct reports, they believe, right, everybody should be, directly contributing, all the way right to the other end of the spectrum, right, which is, I think, a lot of the big companies that we as founders look at and kind of think, So I want to actually hear, I guess, from y'all, how did you go about building out that middle management structure? Like, how did you realize that, okay, I need someone doing this, and more than that, I need a leader here to build out a separate team and actually, right, like take responsibility as a manager for this task, as opposed to, say, just hiring someone to, do the job. And anyone can chime in on this.
Yeah, there's a mantra that goes with the entrepreneur's operating system, which is a series of approaches on how to manage a small company very entrepreneurially, which could be applicable to startups and small businesses, which says delegate and elevate. And so as a founder, I'm always looking what is the box above where I am now in terms of either capabilities or roles and aspirations. Where could I go? And in order to get there, I need to stop doing what I'm doing now and give that to someone else so that I can free up the time to get where I'm going so I can grow as well. So I think it's crucial for my own development to have people I can hand things over to for them to then grow and follow on the path that they desire. And just keeping control over a significant chunk of the operations and and things. As the business gets bigger, you're just gonna get tapped out. There's just not enough time in the day to do as good a job as other people will do. So delegate and elevate has stuck with me because it tackles delegation, which is really, really hard to do at the early stage, right? I never believed people could do the code better than I could, or understand the customers better than I could, or the pitch deck was always inferior to what I could do. And, just all that thinking goes away as more business comes in, and also as you think about where you want to be 5 years from now and how you work towards that. You can't get there, maybe, speaking too generally here, but it's hard to get there while doing the things you're doing today and taking on a whole bunch of additional responsibilities to get you where you want to be tomorrow.
Things that can be most challenging is when you finally have authority over something you know nothing about, and getting used to that feeling of having folks inside the company who report to you, who may manage disciplines that, you might not be a coder, you may be the CEO and CTO reports to you, or you may not have any background in finance and the CFO reports to you. And I think that's really on you to develop trust, and to, maybe in the first couple of months of working with somebody, you're doing the trust but verify, but eventually you need to find a way to trust people and let them do their jobs. And that is the most difficult thing when you don't understand what the job is that they're doing. But what I try to remind people is, we have lawyers, they don't work at our company. We have accountants, they don't work there either, but we would never attempt to do their job well. And you just have to, but we have faith in the looking for. So it's important to try to have that letting go, just like you would with other disciplines that you know nothing about.
Yeah, and on a related point, I think one of the biggest challenges is also realizing really the weight of your opinion and the word and your word and how it's perceived on the team. And the more the team grows, the more sometimes you have these product bombs where a founder or a CEO or a COO or CTO would drop in an idea, and it's really just that, right? Just an idea that needs to be dissected, and a lot of times does not work. But because this is the senior leader on the team, because this is the founder, people would assume that this is the thing to do. And it goes back to what both Shireen and Ashifi mentioned about enabling that middle management layer, being able to really delegate truly, and showing that your opinion is really just that, right? It's just an opinion, just a thought. A lot of times you would be wrong, and a lot of times, and some other times not. And the team needs to take that as what it is, and objectively be able to really address it and consider it. And it's not really some magic formula that you can say simply because you've worked longer or are a little bit more committed than some of the others on the team.
Thanks. And I think one thing that follows from that is, we're talking a lot about, empowering managers, giving them trust. And it is, to a certain extent, I think, a little bit easier to assess if things are working or not from an output perspective. But what I'm wondering is, can any of you give me an example of a situation where one of your middle managers made a personnel-related decision or a discipline-related decision that you disagreed with? And I'd love to hear how you handled that.
Yeah, I could go first. We usually have town halls where everyone in the company comes once a month to look at our sales numbers and our traction and things we've launched, the usual town hall recipe, and it gets quite well attended, typically 90% plus participation. And what we discovered in one of the town halls is that our finance manager was making comments, and his supervisor disagreed with the comments, but the way in which the disagreement was displayed was in front of everyone, right? To Shireen's point, that doesn't go well because in the silence that you have, 40, 50 people in a town hall, not everyone can express the shock or the feedback on how that was taken. And with me also in the town hall, if I don't say anything, just puts a stamp of approval on that kind of behavior. So at times you have to step in and stop immediately. At other times you have to reflect and get additional data sources to make sure you're getting all sides of the story. But if it's happening in real time and it's not something that you would do to others as the founder or as the person holding the vision and the compass for the company culture, it's imperative to do something about it quickly. So in that case, I basically had to go public as well and stop that line of conversation and then put the conversation on a better track, and then follow up individually with both individuals to explain more in detail why I took that approach. So these matters can be very delicate. Fortunately, everybody learned from it and has moved on, but it requires a different skill set to manage those kind of decisions that are made on a virtual platform than perhaps what would have transpired in an office.
Yeah,
that's a very, oh, go on, Shireen.
I was just going to say, I was thinking back as he was talking, give me a little time to like think back to one of those experiences. And that tends to happen in my experience, it's tended to happen when somebody has been a fantastic individual contributor and they work very hard. And then all of a sudden they get a couple of direct reports. They haven't had a manager title before, and they had a lot of misconceptions about what having a manager title actually meant. So once they got that title, it was like getting a crown. I've achieved the prize, as opposed to now I have new things to prove. And sometimes, you have to let the person know that they're responsible for the growth of the people working for them, as opposed to when something goes wrong, now it's whoever reports them, it's their fault. So I've definitely had to move people out of managerial roles back into individual contributor roles, because as it turns out, they just didn't have the personality or frankly, it requires a bit of selflessness to be a decent manager. And if they don't have it, they can't do it.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's come up in all these responses, right, is how important it is that you as a founder take decisive action when it's necessary. Because I mean, all this research, right, that we see around employee satisfaction, the single biggest determining factor of whether someone is happy with their job or not is whether they have a good relationship with their boss, right? Whether they have a good relationship with the person who's managing them on a day-to-day basis. And if you don't take that decisive action, if you don't nip sort of things that you don't like in the bud or reinforce good examples, what you're tacitly saying is whatever the middle manager did is okay, right? You're essentially saying, because that person is essentially an ambassador for your company's culture, your company's vision, and management as a whole. Because as you grow, more and more people will not have a ton of direct contact with you to hear how great you can articulate the vision yourself. And that actually brings us to our next kind of topic. We really have two things I want to cover left in this panel. I want to talk a bit more about vision in a larger sense, because we just did a poll. And we asked folks, what do you think is the biggest determining factor of a company's vision? And about half of you, by far the most common answer, said the biggest determining factor was messaging from the founders. The next most common response was the startup's users, or your customers or your users. So that was a quarter of you. And then 20% of you, so just under a quarter, said the day-to-day environment for the average employee. And then just a few people said it was the folks you chose to raise money from. So I'd love to hear our panel agree or disagree with that. So I'll make it simple to start. Do you all think that messaging from the founders is the biggest determinant of a startup's vision? And why or why not?
I think part of that is, those three other options on that question. If these are not woven into the founder's messaging and are being articulated on a daily and recurrent basis, then I think you're bound to fail at some point in a way or another. I think part of the founder's role is to make sure everyone is really pulled by the same vision and the same goals and the same mission in the back of their minds. Because as we were talking about earlier, if you're enabling that middle management layer to take decisions on their own and move forward and lead teams, unless everyone, and truly everyone, from your customers to your employees, and by customers, it could be the customer choice you make, need to all be aligned on what the vision and the mission is. And if that breaks down, then that inevitably means making some decisions that people disagree with. And you will start to see some cracks and you will start to see some problems. So yeah, I do think that the founders need to embody that vision and that mission and kind of act as sort of the sum of all of those, or maybe not the sum, but maybe the beacon that lets everyone else in the team see that same vision that they're seeing and rally behind it.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes, or one of the things I've seen founders do that, that hasn't been particularly helpful in terms of vision, is their drive seems to be, we just want to be a huge company and raise a ton of money from well-known VCs, and their mission supporting the vision of the company. So we just envision ourselves bigger or dominating or whatever other aggressive language you want to put in there. And they don't really have a way of saying, we want to solve problems. These are how the problems affect all of us. And you can always draw a line. I don't care what the product is. You can always draw a line between what work you're doing and how that is going to affect other humans. And once you can make that connection between, what you see your product doing to make a difference in people's lives, that becomes the vision of the company. It's not really, just whatever the founder says is what the vision is. And to get back to an earlier point, if you're able to go in there as the founder or as a senior manager on the team and drop chaos bombs, there are problems, because people should not, be driven by the feeling of the day and this morning. There has to be sort of that broader picture. And yeah, there's always going to be times where you need to hustle to get, a customer's feature out or something, to save a relationship. That's really different. It's not about what I want. It's about, what's going to make the company successful. So my 2 cents, I guess.
Yeah, and one thing I would also think that's interesting there is that you both said that, to some extent, messaging from the founder is important, and that, of course, it's substantive. And a lot of our attendees here from our earlier survey, just over half of them are actually in B2B companies. And I think that's actually something everyone on this panel fits the description of, at least in some form. And my experience as a B2B founder myself was, before I raised, the number one thing I heard was, solve a hair on fire problem, right? You're selling to big enterprises. They have long purchasing decisions, like there's big, veto points everywhere. The number one thing you need to do is pick a very urgent problem that your MVP is solving. But we know, right, as B2B companies, like we form pretty deep partnerships, right, with the organizations we work with. And I'd love to hear, how did you guys approach transitioning from that, like, let's say maybe more transactional, right, like MVP first, or trying to get that first deployment type messaging, to actually articulating your larger vision, within the market, maybe separate from a specific product offering? I think that might be helpful for some of our attendees, if anyone wants to chime in.
Sure, I could offer a few comments. We certainly started the way you talked about. Our first client globally had lost 70% market share because their product was getting counterfeited aggressively. So their hair was almost, all gone because the fire was was down to embers at that stage. And we had no clients, right? So we needed to establish some credibility, and our MVP worked, and they really trusted what we're doing, and we're able to partner for them to expand the services that we offer, even to products that are not being counterfeited, to basically vaccinate them from being counterfeited, right? So that shows a great amount of belief. And I think one of the ways in which we were successful in achieving that was to invite the customer into the the design process. And so they really became a partner with us and said, you know, we came out with a ton of ideas. I wanted to put out an AI conversational bots. This was like 10 years ago when AI didn't really mean what it means now. Just coming with an engineering background, I wanted to throw as much technology at the problem as possible. And then the customer really helped us sort through and say, yeah, I'll pay for this. I'm not going to pay for that. Yeah, that's great, but we don't really need it now. And just going through that process gave them comfort to share other problems that they were facing that they believed, just from our character and our can-do attitude, even if we didn't have a solution there and then, they thought us being honest enough to either tell them or come up with one that would show promise. And so getting that trust established early and showing the customer that their inputs will actually be worked on just helps strengthen that bond and gives them a channel to express themselves more freely and confide in you what their challenges are. And then once you do that with one customer, you've already gone through the process working with a large company, and then you can use the skills that you've gained to approach other customers. So that's our viewpoint from our story.
One thing
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, go on, Shereen.
I was just going to say, one thing to consider early on is potentially forming a customer advisory board. B2B companies usually wait too long to do this, but once you have 4 or 5 customers, you know, or even as you're trying to attract those first couple of customers, it's worthwhile to keep in mind, you know, and so as you're trying to land your first couple of clients, putting the messaging out there that they will become part of the advisory board and therefore have greater levels of access and feedback can be maybe a little bit of a carrot to coming in earlier and having a little bit more say. But I think one of the things to consider is as much as we all love Steve Jobs, we are not all Steve Jobs, and we don't all have this, you know, like 10-year vision for how the market's going to go, and we know what everybody wants before they know what they want. And I think just sort of acknowledging that that has been part of a startup culture for the last 20 years and probably is probably worth making a note of.
Yeah, I think that as my journey makes me think a bit about, like, I think starting with Steve Jobs or let's say Mark Zuckerberg or whoever, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse, right? Like, you really want to like understand what it is you're trying to do first, right, with your customers, with your core users, and then hopefully eventually, right, you'll be crazy successful to the point that you're a household name if that's really what you want. But I think, like, on the B2B side, like, another thing actually that I found really relevant with what Ashifi mentioned is, like, when we're working really closely with those early customers, what you will find is if you are selling something that is expensive enough that it's, say, someone at the VP or SVP level and above who is approving that decision, even if you do not invest a lot in like outward facing marketing, every 2 to 4 years, like, the leads you have at one organization are very likely going to go to your other prospects, or they're very likely going to take jobs there. So in many cases, like, you can actually fairly organically disseminate, if you're in a concentrated industry especially, what your actual vision is, just through a really strong track record of involving your champions at these organizations, making them feel really bought in. I mean, I personally have closed multiple deals solely because of a prospect at one, like someone who was a champion at one customer just changed jobs and then, called me up and said, hey, I'd love to use this at my current organization. So I think, like, it's really easy in current environment, especially because venture capital really gets all the oxygen compared to a lot of other financing sources, to go for this, like, oh, I'm the CEO, I need to be doing keynotes, like, I need to be giving speeches, like, but in reality, right, like, sometimes, like, there's a performative element that I think people can skip to without realizing that, right, like, how people actually perceive your vision, like, is based on how the stakeholders who actually use your product, right, are going to feel. Now, we are running short on time, but there is a final topic I wanted to talk about, which is that, it's COVID. Lots of us are remote. Some of us have field-based operations. One thing that we've actually found is we've had international operations for some time. So we're seeing that one of the, I guess, silver linings of this whole remote work culture is that it allows access to a much broader pool of talent. And I'd love to hear kind of how you guys have set up that remote culture, and especially if you've been forced to have different, I guess, sort of cultures or working practices between teams in different geographies. And Ashifi, I'd love you to lead with this, since I know your company is, of course, explicitly international in nature.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We've been fully remote in our Boston office for a couple of years now, save for occasional meetings to see if people are shaving and cutting their hair in person. And so we all actually felt that the market is sort of catching up to this. So we've been living like it's been COVID for the last couple of years, and one of the things that we benefited from having the overseas subsidiaries have so much autonomy is investing early in face-to-face time. So right now, a lot of companies are going remote, but I wonder in 2 years when the teams change and you're giving people significant responsibility and just haven't gotten to understand who they are and how they're situated in life as well as you would if you shared time with them in person, it's going to be very hard to maintain those same levels of trust. We're coasting off trust that has been built off significant in-person time. And in our experience, you need that to be able to get to the altitude of fully remote. There's some companies that have been fully remote from day one. So there might be some ways to do it, but I'm yet to see a large, say 2, 3, 4, 500 person type company that started off remote and stayed remote for several years. So we started off with a foundation of in-person experiences and going to client meetings together, just understanding the people we're working with. We have very high retention rates. Our management team, worked with someone 9 years, 6 years, and so on. So people like to stay within Sproxel, but it's hard to do without the initial in-person engagement.
We would have loved to be fully remote, but we work with robots. So someone needs to be in person, moving them, watching them, and sort of feeding them, since we work with food robots, so that they can feed all of us. I think since COVID started, we initially became fully remote, and then we have a sort of a hybrid model now where some people are in the office on a more recurring basis, making sure they're engaging with these robots and the hardware, and then the majority of the team is working remotely. And it's been working pretty well. I think maybe one of the most important thing is a lot more communication, right? And that means, and specifically a lot more open communication that's accessible to everyone. One of the ways we're doing this is monitoring private versus public Slack activity and encouraging everyone to post things in more public channels, so that everyone in the team feels more engaged and more taken into the conversation. A lot of it means that the folks in the lab or in the office have to take pictures and videos and make sure to share them with everyone at all the time, so that everyone feels as though they're part of one team. And I think the one more thing to add is that there's a lot more on the management side to sort of read between the lines and try to understand when people are starting to burn out, if we need to have more social activity. And I think the most important of these is explicitly making room for social catch-ups and activities in a remote context, right? And that could be reserving 5 or 10 minutes at the start of a meeting to make sure we catch up on how we're all doing, or explicitly dedicating a few hours on a recurring basis just to do social activities, catch up, get to know each other a little bit more.
And I know we have a lot more we could talk about on all of these topics, but we are almost out of time. So I'm going to ask everyone to give our attendees one final piece of advice. Can really be anything that you think is relevant, but I would love to hear you give a more counterintuitive piece of advice, maybe something that our attendees aren't used to second guessing. But what's like a counterintuitive piece of advice you'd give to a founder who's worked on a vision, maybe has that first round of capital or first big customer, and is now thinking, what's next? And we can go reverse to how we started. So Shireen, Ashifi, and Anthony.
I guess I would say feedback isn't always the answer. The when you have a tough decision to make, sometimes it always feels natural to let's reach out to 5 different advisors and get their opinions. And you may just end up with advice whiplash. And sometimes you just need to make the decision on your own and then monitor the points just more closely in the near term to make sure it was the right thing to do. But sometimes you have to make the calls without any, or sometimes it's not particularly helpful.
From my end, I've learned that the default human nature is positive. If people are given the right conditions and have a clear direction where to go, more than an average, they're gonna do the right thing. So set yourself up to welcome people to just perform and give them the room and the trust that they're gonna do the right thing. And then have systems in place in case people fall off the tracks and don't do the right thing. But it's very rewarding to extend that amount of trust and then have people just rise to the occasion and pay you back. And it just makes my role so much more enjoyable to think of people as positive agents of change rather than sort of to constantly have to keep track of what they're doing.
Counterintuitively, I think as a leader, one of the best things you can do is become redundant. And a good test of this is, when you're on vacation for a few days or you're focusing on more external things, can the organization move forward as if you were there, taking the decisions that you would take and pushing the agenda just the same exact way you would do, because you all now share that same exact vision and are all working towards the same goal. And I know it's counterintuitive, but it's one of those things that I had to learn, because that's truly how you become a leader and not just a manager.